So this is my schedule quality checklist. There are a lot of checkpoints. Some of them will be new to you. I did not explain it before, but what I would typically do, I could explain all settings here in different slides, but it's gonna feel lost and overwhelming to connect everything later on. So I prefer to have everything under one checklist to refer to. By the time I complete my tutorial about the checklist, later on in future, when you look at any item, it's going to be easy for you and because you understand what it means. We have 5 groups, one related to activity attributes, the nature of the activity. The second group is about scheduling options. The third group is the scheduling log. The fourth group is about scheduling. The fifth group is about critical path. From the top, let's start one by one. The first point here is I want to make sure that all activity IDs are structured as per our activity ID hierarchy, the one we explained before, how we can define digits, the number of characters, all of that. But here is how you can check. You can check everything manually, scroll down, but if you work with larger projects, you might find it not effective. So what I'm going to do is I have named all activity IDs here. But if you did not, by default, Primavera will create an activity ID that starts with the letter A. So by default, you're going to have an activity ID with an A. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to filter, create a new filter called activity ID, and it will start with the letter A. And click OK. I'm going to also group and sort hide if empty so I can see things better. And these activities are not updated yet as per my activity ID structure because I created them. It started with the letter A by default and I did not update them. So that's the time when you need to revisit the activities right now and edit the activity ID. Okay, and it's gonna follow your system, right? If it's a construction, start with CN. We've talked about it. The second activity attribute, you want to avoid activities with long duration because the long durations are not a good practice. If you have an activity which has 18 plus days, there is a high chance that it can be further broken down. So for example, if I have an activity about tile installation in any floor, so under maybe floor 5, I have tiles installation and it has 25 days original duration. That's a high duration. So the first thing I want to look at, it's actually practical. It will take 25 days for the whole floor. But what I want to examine at this point is it can be further broken down. I can have 10 days for living room, 5 days for bedroom. I'm going to have also 5 days for the bathroom, 60 days for corridor. So you can see what I'm talking about. When you see an activity with long duration, there is a high chance that it can be further broken down. So what if your project is not residential? What if it's a bridge? It's a linear. It's, it's like maybe 10 kilometers long. Okay, so it's normal for one activity to take 3 months to complete. Nothing is wrong with that. But you want to also break it down to manageable pieces. The whole thing, the concept about long duration and why it should be avoided is it is hard to manage a scope for an activity that is taking too long to complete, or it is planned to take too long to complete. So the problem with the bridge is what you can do is you can divide phases, phase 1 and phase 2. Each phase has boundaries or even more phases, but make it manageable. So you know the boundaries of each phase. Maybe the first 200 meters, it's going to take 15 days. That's fine. That's how you can really approach the activity from monitoring perspective. So I want to avoid activities with long duration. There are some exceptions. The first exception is sometimes in the substructure, you're going to have long duration because the productivity is really slow. So if you take 25 days to achieve Rafter bar, it's fine for Rafter bar because the productivity is really low. You have to do a lot of work in the same confined space. So the productivity is really limited. And it is also at the same time, it's easy to manage and monitor the progress because you're going to have a specific scope for the Rafter bar. You can see how many cubic meters you have poured or how many tons of steel reinforcement you have installed. Second exception is the procurement. If I have an activity with 60 days of procurement, the nature of this activity is acceptable because the nature of that activity is different. So there are two exceptions and I explained them. Ensure activities are assigned with correct calendars. Calendars are one step in the roadmap we talked about. So go to Primavera. I'm gonna edit the filter. I wanna see something else. I wanna filter with the calendar is not equal to calendar days, because when I open the calendar, I have here my project calendars, and I have 3 different calendars under my project. If you remember, when we created calendars, we created them under project. We did not use the global calendars. I'm gonna add another calendar is not equal to the second calendar, which is consultant. Another condition calendar is not equal to, and by the way, if you maybe wonder how I go to calendar fast, I type it from my keyboard. So when I click on that, I do type CA very quickly. So CA, the first 2 letters of calendar. So CA, it's gonna direct me to the calendar. Okay, so instead of looking for it, in the drop-down menu, and I have here contractors calendar, but you cannot keep this condition, the any, like or and or, because in this case, it will show you everything in the project, because it's gonna show you, like if it tries to meet the first condition, it will not show you the calendar days, but you said or, right? So, the best way is you have all. So if none of these conditions exist, I want to see what's going on here. Okay, what are the activities that do not have any assignment for the 3 calendars? And I have 2 activities. I'm gonna go to general. I forgot to assign calendar. I have here one engineering activity, submission. The submission is made by the contractor. So it will take contractor's calendar. For the approval, it's consultant activity. So it should be assigned under consultant's calendar. I'm gonna click schedule because it's gonna affect the outcome. It's still acceptable. I still have free float, as I explained before, but in some cases, maybe you forgot to assign your appropriate calendar for one substructure activity, which is a critical activity. So if you fail to do that and you try to correct it right now, it's gonna maybe have negative load. It's gonna change something. Okay, so that's one checklist. The percentage complete type has to be duration, and I'm gonna explain it quickly because we talk about it more in the schedule update. When you go to general, you will find that the percentage complete type is duration based. And if I go to any activity, for example, and let's take this Rafter bar because the original duration is an even number. So I'm gonna just assume that it has actually started. I'm gonna give it 50%. So right now there is no progress. So my original duration is 18 days. My remaining is 18 days as well. But what if I write 50%? My original is still the same, but I have remaining 9 days. It means that for an activity that has 18 days duration, if I achieve 50%, then I have 50% of the original duration left to do the work, which makes sense, right? for the column rebar, what if I show 20%? Can you expect the outcome? It's gonna be 8 remaining because 20% of the 10 days are consumed. So 80% balance work of an activity that had 10 days original duration will be 8 days remaining duration. So that's the duration based. If you did not have duration based, this number will not be updated with you. You're gonna see 10 days or the same original duration as remaining duration all the time, which is misleading for reasons which we will talk about in the schedule update. But percentage complete type has to be duration. To make your job easier before you start using Primavera, I'm gonna go to the project layout. I'm gonna choose any project. You will find under defaults tab. So these are some options that will be given to you by default. Under percent complete type, you wanna keep duration. Okay, so for any new activity you add in this project, it's gonna have the percent complete type as duration. So it will save you future errors and review. You can see also here the auto numbering default. The activity ID prefix is A. So by default, I'm gonna have A1000 by default when I create a new activity. And I wanna see that, I wanna keep it the same way. I do not want to change it because if you can see, it helped me do the checklist for activity ID, right? I filtered activity ID that starts with a letter. So I want to keep that. I do not want to make something ambiguous because later on, when I want to figure out what has gone wrong or what wasn't updated, I will not be able to do that. So I want to keep that as well. We finished the first group. The second group is about scheduling options. The first option or the first item on your checklist is you have to uncheck use expected finish date. It should be off. So where my scheduling options are located in Primavera P6, I will go to Primavera, go to activities, and I will go to schedule or press F9 from my keyboard as a shortcut. Then I will go here under options, click options. Then this is the list of scheduling options. We need to make sure that it has been set to serve us better, to the best practices. Nothing is wrong here, but if it's wrong, Oracle will not even introduce it, but we all have different expectations from Primavera. And what I'm going to do here is I will explain all options and why I need you to follow a specific checklist. And I'm going to explain why, of course. And if it will make sense to you, then you will agree with me on that. The first option is to ignore relationships to and from other projects. But before I talk about the first option, my first checklist item is to uncheck use expected finish date, because this is really important for me, because by default, these other items are unchecked. So I'm not going to really worry about it, but I'm going to explain it as well, because even though you will not use them, I think it is still a better idea to understand what features do, right? Even though we will not use them. But first, what is more important for me at this moment is to uncheck that, because by default, it's activated. So what is use expected finish dates is, I'm gonna click close. These are very, very sensitive options. So whenever I do something here, it will give me another confirmation message. Do you want to proceed? Do you want to save? Primavera does not show this kind of window in anything. If you go to activity codes, if you want to create a WBS, it does not ask you to save, to proceed. It's an action, but this is really sensitive. That's why I did a change here, and it will ask me to confirm. I want to first cancel that. I want to keep this on so that I will show you what it does. And after we understand the consequences, I'm going to go back and uncheck that. Okay. I'm going to just return everything here from my previous tutorial. I'm going to right click, go to columns, under dates, you will see expected finish. There is no expected start in Primavera. There is only expected finish. If I choose expected finish to show here, there is an option in Primavera that you can override the relationships we have just created. By default, this is my network. Based on durations, relationship types, I can see dates scheduled because of that. But Primavera allows you to bypass the network rules and override that with a determined expected finish. So for example, my excavation will naturally start on 19th of January and finish on 5th of February. What if I choose expected finish, not 5th of February, but maybe 10th of February? So what happens is there will be two things right now will happen after I did this action. The first one is expected finish is like a constraint. It's something will override any network rules or any logical relationships. So if after I click schedule, the activity here, the finish will be changed to be 10th of February, or the duration will also change because I have now a new finish date. So the duration will expand accordingly. Second consequences will be this activity will not start like one day after anymore because it's finished to start relationship. It will not start on 6th of February. It's going to start on 11th based on the expected finish. So if I click schedule right now and look at the duration and the start date of compaction here, duration increased because my start date is the same, but I did override for the scheduled excavation activity to be 10th of February instead of 5th of February, if you remember. So now this finish date has been forced to the schedule. As a result, this is my revised original duration right now. My start date is the same, but the duration, the finish date is changed based on the expected finish. The compaction will start 12th because maybe 11th, I assume it's a weekend. That's why it does not show. And that's why calendars are so important. And I have no idea why Oracle would ever do something like that. Why they would introduce something like that. It's against all scheduling practices. It just doesn't make sense. It might make sense to you right now. Like maybe this is when I expect the finish date. But if we're going to do that manually for all activities or most of the activities, then why do we have the schedule at the first place? Why do I need to have originally the start and original duration for excavation linked to the project start? Why do I need to do that? I just need to just expected finish, right? Because that's what I care about. And everything will be driven by this expected finish. So you are sort of creating a schedule manually, right? Based on manual expected finish. The second consequences also is you have become really intuitive about the schedule network. For a baseline schedule to have a value is to have assumptions and have good intention about how you plan to execute the project. I'm going to take 5 days for that activity. After that, I'm going to take another 10 days to start this activity and how you progress and see the future or how the future will look like based on what you have assumed and what you have accomplished along the way. But when you have the option to have something like that expected finish, you're gonna be against of everything I explained right now. The valuable part in baseline is to see the contractor's original intention to do the work. And when you go against this intention, for some reason, it's gonna give you an alarm. It does make sense that each week you failed to achieve milestones, so you're gonna revise something accordingly and see what will happen. That's not valuable. As much as possible, I want to keep my schedule to tell me alarms, to give me negative flow, to tell me delays, to tell me that based on my intention, I have to complete this activity in 10 days. Because otherwise, if I took longer, all successor activities will be impacted and the project completion will be impacted accordingly. But this will not happen if I force the expected finish again into the network. And I did only that for one activity. So can you imagine what will happen if it has become a habit, if I keep doing this for any activity I want? Bottom line, don't use expected finish. And you cannot undo that. You can just go and delete in this way. And you have to remember the original duration. So it's going to be 15 because it's a really powerful tool here. It overrides anything, right? So if I remove the expected finish, don't expect the original duration to be back to normal. You have to really do the changes because it has become of the programming inside the program right now. Let's go back to schedule. You can keep this checked on if you want, but don't use expected finish. It's really up to you. So you can just don't use the column or don't use it. And this option, if it's checked on, will not be harmful anymore. Or you can just ignore that or uncheck the box so that later in future, if you decided to use this column, it will not have any impact. I keep it on, but I don't use the column because I understand the consequences. Okay, so let's talk about other options, although we will not use them. Ignore relationships to and from other projects. In Primavera, you can open more than one project at once. If I go to projects, for example, I can have two projects here. I will select both of them, click open projects. On the top, you can see that I have a project ID, comma, the second project ID, in parentheses, the description or the project name of the first file, comma, the name of the second file. So that's how you see information on top this way. You can have right click, collapse all, and you see both projects with its own dates and relationship, everything basically. I do that when I want to review information. Some people want to link relationships. Like, for example, I want to dismantle the tower crane from the first project, and I want to link it to the construction or assembly of tower crane in the second project. Some people want to do that, but it's not good scheduling practice. The problem is it makes sense if you do that in the BizLite, but in a schedule update, no one knows what's going to happen in future. It's impossible. You know, from my experience, I think maybe 50% of the assumptions come true, but we do not expect many things. Like we're going to have the best relationship ever with the client, but at the end, we end up in the court. Totally fine. It happens. So no one can really see the future. So later on, maybe you will have additional tower crane in the project. Maybe it will be delayed, but you will claim liquidated damages and time and money from the client. So you don't have to worry about this relationship anymore. The second reason why it is not recommended is you are dealing right now with two files. You have to open two files. You have to import both files every time you deal with the project, which is not good practice. You want to keep everything in one file. So these are the consequences. I do that, I open them. So for example, I can open BizLine with a schedule update and I can maybe review some information. I have done it, but I do not add relationships among the projects. You can also, if you go to file and export, you can export the XCR file. And when you do that, both projects will be stored in one XCR file. So next time, or maybe another person imports this XCR file, they're going to see two projects imported. So you can combine projects and export them into one file. That's fine. And I will go to projects. I have two projects right now open, but I can just click a specific project, which is our project right now, and click open project. Then it will be the only project open for me. Second option. So of course you want to, ignore. So if you are used to add relationships for your internal reviews among the project, you can select that to ignore the relationships. It's up to you, but you understand the consequences right now. The second option is to make open-ended activities critical. So what the open-ended activities are? It's the activities without any successor. If I go to the project filter, and I'm gonna have successors equals blank. Click OK. So it will show you the activities without successors. And I have only one milestone, which is okay. We agreed that this is the only exception. So this option I showed you right now in scheduling options, it will ask you if you have any activities without successors, which we call in Primavera language open-ended activities. They are without successors. Would you like to consider them critical by default? No. Why would I do that? Of course not. So it should be left unchecked. We talked about expected finish dates. Schedule automatically when a change affects dates. So for example, can you imagine that? So if I change the original duration of the compaction to 8 days, right? So what happened when I added 8 days, the finish date, it changed as well, which makes sense. Let's look at the left bar. If I make it 19 days, the finish date has been changed. So if you wanna check this option I showed you right now, everything you do that will cause a change in dates, the schedule will be automatically run to give you the outcome based on your change. It makes sense, right? But here is the disadvantage. We were building the program right now, and we added activities. We edited the original duration, right? We were building the schedule. Can you imagine that for each activity, when you try to edit the duration or edit the lag, you have to wait for a few seconds for Primavera to finish scheduling the project. It's gonna be really time consuming. You can keep it active if you know what you are doing, but I did not find it valuable before. I'm gonna return this back to original. But anytime anything you do here that will cause a change in dates, it's gonna be automatically scheduled. It makes sense in one regard. If I have this 8, I'm gonna see this 14, but also this start date is gonna be 15th, one day after. So what you are looking at here is not real. So this date is not right anymore. This date is real, is correct based on your change in the original duration. It has become 14th, but this is not true. All what you see here is not true. You have to schedule the project to see the final outcome after your changes. It makes sense, but my concern is about the time consumed, that you want to do a bunch of changes. For example, when we were revising the duration to reduce the negative load early in this lecture, I know what's going on. I wanted to just edit few activities before I run them because I know what I'm going to do, right? So what I wanted to do is I have negative 20. I reduced the duration of a specific activity by 1 day. I don't expect the negative load to go away. I still need to do more work, but it's gonna auto schedule. But for me, I just wanna do some few changes before I see how it will look like. Maybe I expect it will become negative 10 instead of negative 20, right? So that's the purpose. Level resources during scheduling. I will talk about level resources later on, and also recalculate assignments cost. This is very, very, very important. And for planning engineers, actually, it's a very common question in interviews. I don't know why, but they love it in the interview. I think maybe because it's tough, so they want to challenge the applicant. And I was asked about this question a few times. That's how I know. And when I give the answer, the interviewer would be like really impressed. Oh, you know that. But I just, I don't think it's worth the hype or, the importance people gave it to, but I'm going to explain it now. I just remember, and it's funny. That's why I interviewed also like other junior planning engineers, but I never did that. I find it boring or annoying. I don't know. I just did not feel that, but it's a very common question by the way. So under the settings, when scheduling progress activities use retaining logic or progress override or actual dates. So what is the difference here? To better explain that, let's have just a small project to talk about. I'm gonna click insert and create a new project, just really quick project. Okay. I'm gonna have a bunch of activities. I'm gonna add 4 activities, E, B, C, D. By default, I always love sorting by start date, but I'm gonna only, for this case, sort by activity ID for a reason, which I will show you now in a moment. I'm gonna link all of them. We know how it's done right now. I'm gonna select all, link activities, then I'm gonna have all activities linked. Schedule A, B, C, D. So what happens if activity B started before activity A? In this case, I might have soft logic in place. It is not hard logic. It is not like block and the plaster, but maybe it's something related to ceiling and the floor. It could be really any sequence you want, soft logic. So in this case, activity B started before activity A. I'm gonna start activity B maybe after 2 days. I'm gonna run the program now on the 26th. Before I do that, I want to give percentage. Let's have this 60 days. I'm gonna have 50% for that activity. So activity B started on 25th of January, and it is 50% to complete. My remaining duration is 3 days accordingly. I'm gonna schedule the project on data date, for example, 26. So on 26th of January, this is my progress. I'm gonna schedule that now. So here is what happens. Remember, I run the schedule on 26, okay? So on 26th of January, I had 50% for that activity. My remaining duration is 3 days. So you might wonder that why the finish date is 3rd of February. It should be the data date, 26th of January. So on 26th of January, I have 3 days left to complete the project. So it makes sense that the completion date of activity B will be 29th of January, not 3rd of February. But what we have right now, I must first check the scheduling options. And it is set to retain the logic by default. It means I have to respect the original relationships in place. This activity is still linked with activity A as a predecessor. Activity A will be completed on 31st of January, okay? Although activity B is in progress, and although activity B can be completed on 29th of January, the way I explained before, 3 days remaining duration from the data date, so it should be 29th of January. But because it's retained logic, I have to respect the original relationships. Activity B cannot be completed before activity A is completed because activity A is a predecessor. Although it makes sense that activity B can be completed on 29th of January, it will be earlier than the finish date of its predecessor. And retained logic will respect the relationship. So if I keep retained logic setting, I have to wait for the completion of activity A, then add the 3 days remaining duration. So 3 days after the finish date here, I'm gonna have 3rd of February. It's a retained logic. I have to respect original duration. We have the opposite. Progress override. If I choose that, I will ignore and disregard the current relationships. It's gonna be on my own. Like, I don't care about activity A anymore. I'm gonna respect my current progress and show the forecast completion date accordingly. Again, it will ask you for confirmation. It's very sensitive. Yes. I'm gonna run the program and let's look what happens here. First of all, the reason is 28th of January, not 29th, is because in Primavera, when you run the schedule on 26, it is not the end of 26th of January. It's the start of 26th of January. It is like you are scheduling the project on 26th of January at 7 a.m. early in the morning. So you still have the whole 26th of January ahead of you to schedule work. That's how Primavera understands that. So remaining duration is 3 days. I am scheduling the project on 26th of January early in the morning. So I'm gonna have the whole 26th of January, 27th of January, 28th of January. So that's why with remaining duration 3 days, I have the completion date 28th. Why also I can do that and get the same outcome? Because it's a 7-day work week. So I don't have to think about weekends or something like that. But maybe if I change the calendar, maybe 28th will be a weekend. So it's gonna show me 29th, just 1 day after the weekend, because there should be no progress or schedule activities scheduled at the weekend. So, but it's a calendar for this purpose. I think it's fine, but we know what's going on. Activity A, which is the predecessor, will be completed 31st of January. Activity B can now be completed, is forecasted to be completed even before the predecessor, because I choose progress override. This is a major difference. My recommendation, which I explain in the checklist, is to keep retained logic, not progress override. Why is that? Because in some cases, maybe you can start some progress in activity B, but in fact, the completion cannot be done until you do the progress of activity A. That's one point. The second point is with progress override, activity C, okay, will not be dependent on activity A anymore. So activity C start date will follow what you have from activity B, right? So 28th of January, finish date. I'm gonna start 1 day after on 29th of January. But what happens is, in some cases, maybe this is the only exception you have. Maybe activity B can start before activity A, but activity C still needs the progress of activity A. And sometimes it happens, for example, I don't want to confuse you with examples, but let's assume that I'm gonna have a first coat paint, then false ceiling, then tiles. I found myself that I start false ceiling without the first coat paint. It's fine, it was soft logic, so I started. However, I cannot start the tiles without the activity first, the paint first coat. And that's why sometimes it happens. So one exception doesn't mean that this is the prevailing approach in the schedule overall. So sometimes you still need the relationship here. It's another. So I would recommend retained logic. Actual dates is self-explanatory. So I'm going to follow the actual dates. So it's similar right now to the retained logic because it is not progress override. So the finish date has to respect the existing relationship. And if I complete that activity, for example, you see this activity here, it follows the actual dates. So the start date of that activity is 26th of January because the actual completion date of the predecessor is 25th. So my logic right now, or the dates of non-started activities, are scheduled based on the actual dates of its predecessors. So very self-explanatory. Okay, enough about that. Calculate start to start lag from early start or from the actual start. So if you have a slab form work and slab rebar relationship, and if I have start to start relationship with lag 2 days, would you want Primavera to show you the start date of rebar based on like or 2 days after the actual start of a slab form work or not? So based on actual start or early start, do not use actual start, because you cannot just schedule the project based on the actual progress. You still have to respect the existing dependencies. So don't use lags from the actual start, because if you are in delay, you don't want to amplify that in the whole schedule. And by the way, everything I explain here is checked. So I wanna, in my checklist, the retained logic is on. Calculate start to start lag, it should be from early start, not actual dates. So I give also my preference after I explain, but I'm explaining everything. Define critical activities as total float less than or equal to 0 by default, which is the common practice worldwide. You can customize that if you want. You can make it 1 hour or 24 hour. So activities with maybe 1 day positive float, it will be considered critical if you choose to. I don't see any reason why anyone would do that. So you can customize the total float criticality threshold, or would you like to define critical activities as the longest path itself? We understand right now kind of the difference between critical and the longest path. We will continue to explain that later on in the schedule update. It's going to be more visible, but we understand right now. So if I have one activity on the longest path, which is -20, and one activity -10, the -10 will not be critical anymore, because I choose to define critical activities as the activities which fall on the longest path only. Calculate float based on finish date of each project, opened projects. So this is the case where you have more projects open. I don't work with more files open at the same time. I work on each project separately. If I go to my checklist, you should keep that define critical activities as total float less than or equal to 0. Next, I have compute total float as finish float or the start float. So this is one network we have done together in the past. And I have right now calculated the total float. So it has become 0 based on the difference between late finish and early finish. What about the difference between late start and early start? It's also 0. In 99.9% of the time, you're gonna have the same result. Whether you calculate the difference between finish dates or start dates, total float will be the same. Here also, it's 3 days for both. But if you have discrepancy and you have the amount here is different from the amount here in the early start, how would you like Primavera to calculate the final total float? Because there is only one field in Primavera, it's called total float. They don't have total float based on finish dates, total float based on start dates. You have to make it clear which difference you want to follow. And I would keep it by default, which is the difference between finish dates. Why is that? Very simple and logical. You can have an activity that started very late, but you completed the activity on time. Is it considered delay? No, I care only about when the activity is completed. You can start really late. It's going to be huge delays, but at the end, I fast tracked the progress. I made it on time. So I completed the activity on time or even earlier. I do not want to have negative float or calculate it based on that. It's I care for the finish. And also I can start the activity very early. I started way ahead of schedule, right? But I finished the activity late. So if I keep the calculation of total float based on the difference of start dates, it's going to be misleading. It will tell me the activity has positive float because you started ahead of time. But in fact, the activity is disaster. It's in delay. I completed or I forecasted to complete after the planned finish date. So it makes sense. The last setting here we have is the calendar for scheduling relationship lag. Would you like to calculate it based on the predecessor or successor? But let's have a look about what's going on here. I'm gonna go back to my project. Let's assume that this is my project to start, and I'm not gonna start the excavation on day one. I have to do some mobilization, get my excavator, talk to my supplier. So I'm gonna start in 2 days. So if my project start on 19th, I'm not gonna start on 19th. I'm gonna start 2 days after. I'm gonna schedule the project. So I have here 2 days. As per Primavera's definition, the lag is a duration field. So that's a duration because you have to wait for 2 days, right? So it's a duration. So how would you like to calculate the lag here? Based on the predecessor calendar, which is the project start, if I go to general, it's a consultant calendar. So I have only 5 working days per week. I have 2 weekends or 2 weekend days. There is also an option in Primavera to let you calculate the lag based on the successor, so based on the excavation calendar, which is contractor's calendar. So do different calendars, right? How would you like to count 2 days based on consultant calendar? So you're gonna skip 2 weekend days, or based on contractors. So that's the setting. It's flexible, but I think it's the best practice to keep it default based on the predecessor calendar. So this is really tough part, I know, but again, as I explained, I wanted to explain everything. I did not want to skip some parts, but it's really challenging. And I'm explaining a lot of stuff, which even I think planning engineers don't know, people who are doing the work already. Log. So what is my log? So first, I'm gonna change that back to normal. All right, so that's my log. Here, view log. So if I open the log, I will see something like that. I will see the statistics of the schedule, but be careful about something. Don't always view the log. So for example, I have here some feedback from the log that says some activities are without predecessor. I have some invalid relationship. I have dates. I have start date, finish date, right? So make sure that you schedule the project first, then you view the log. So if you do some changes here and you want to now review the health of a schedule or some statistics, don't go to view log, schedule the project first, then view the log. So it can be up to date. Log, first checklist, no activities without predecessors. So if I go to my log, and under warnings, because it's a huge, right? It's something very critical. Activities without predecessors, you have 2, but we agreed we should only have 1. So this is an extra activity which I missed to add the predecessor for. I will copy the activity ID, go to Primavera. If you have this, right, just close it. It's a visualizer. We'll talk about it also. And I explained also how you can use Control F, how you can find, right? I explained this quickly, but what you can do is I want to search for an ID. So I have to have the orange marked around the activity ID column. If I want to search for anything about activity name, I'm going to select here, but I'm searching for activity ID. If I go here, for example, in finishes, click find, it cannot, because it is only scanning the finish column, but I want to scan the activity ID, and it is true without predecessor. So I'm gonna link it with a predecessor, project start. Then I'm gonna schedule the project first. And if I click schedule and click view log, you're gonna have two schedule logs open. So get used to it, okay? Make sure that you always close the log, right? Like any logs open, just to close them. Make sure you have only the latest and one log open at a time, so you'll not get confused. Okay, I have one without predecessor, one without successor. Agree, because this is the only exception. Okay, we talked about that. No activities with constraints. We talked about the constraints and why they are critical. And we want to only to have constraints applied on activities, contractual milestones that bear the liquidated damages, not any activities. In many projects, you're going to have the project completion as a contractual milestone with liquidated damages, not only a contractual milestone, because I showed you in the first lecture that you can have control milestones listed in the contract, but do not have constraint there because it does not have liquidated damages. They can have in the contract something saying that substructure has to be completed after 2 months from the project commencement. But what if you did not? Will you pay liquidated damages? Will you pay penalty? No, you will not. It's going to be alarming, but it will not be penalty. So don't put constraints then. The purpose of constraint that it, as I showed you in the network diagram, it is the main reason for generating negative float. Negative float is not something very pleasant. Not everyone wants to see. It's a violation of the contract terms. There is someone who is in default right now. It could be the employer who delayed you. It could be you as a contractor who failed to fulfill your responsibilities. But the project is in delay, right? But some milestones in the contract may be listed in a table about delivering the tiles or delivering the paint materials. So what if you did not? Maybe the activity is not critical at the first place. It will not show any negative. It has 30 days positive float, right? That's the nature of that activity. So not every milestone has to be critical based on how you link it, everything. So it can be misleading. So always apply constraint on any milestones that bear liquidated damages. So when you violate that constraint or a specific phase completion in the project, you're gonna alarm that, yes, the project is in delay, but not a milestone is in delay. Okay, I'm gonna have my schedule log. And yeah, here I have under statistics, activities with constraint. Okay, one on the project to finish. Some people apply the constraint this way. They will go to projects, go to the project itself, under dates, they want to have must finish by constraint. It will give you the same result, except for one thing. Okay, if I go to activities, I have here my constraint finish on 8th of January. We understand right now that when you schedule a project, you schedule it at the beginning of the day. But have here the constraint is really clear, right? Finish on this date. So finish on the end of that day, 8th of January. Some people will do something like that. They will go to the projects, must finish by, you can apply the constraint here. But if your project completion is 8th of January, you should make the must finish by 9th of January. This is the only difference. You're going to have 1 day more, because 1 day more here means it must finish by 9th of January, 7 a.m. Okay. Don't worry about it, but bottom line, what I would recommend, don't show the constraint here. Show it in as a constraint in the activities, but not outside. Why? Because you are using Primavera, but not everyone uses Primavera. Okay. If you have, it's like this constraint is built in the schedule overall. You can have the asterisk here, very clear, which is Primavera way to explain that there is a constraint here. So I can see the constraint here, but if I apply it outside on the project file, it is like invisible. I don't really see it. And most importantly, when I apply it under that activity, I can see it in the log. So I can see activities with constraint, which is a part of the schedule review. The last element under the log checkup is no activities with invalid relationship. So what is invalid relationship? Under the log, right? We are still under the log grouping here, but this is for milestones. Yeah. So typically it applies to milestones. So milestone activities with invalid relationships. What it means here. This milestone is a finish milestone. If I go to relationships, I can see all the predecessors, link it with finish to start. It means the finish of that activity, of each activity here, is linked to the start of the project finish. But there is no start here. It is only finish. So if you want to avoid invalid relationships, you have to change everything here to finish to finish. So the finish of that activity is linked to the finish of that activity, which is correct because I don't have anything else. I have only finish date. What if you keep it like that? Nothing will change. No dates will change. Everything is going to be fine. But it's important to understand that it is not perfect. It is not a good practice. It is something you can see here later on under invalid relationships. So later on, you can see it, you can understand what's going on. You can decipher its meaning and see how it applies to you. So if you want to really be perfect about your work in scheduling, don't show invalid relationships. If you missed it for any reason, don't worry, nothing will be impacted. Okay. For the scheduling part, like the quality of our scheduling, the scheduling practice, right? The scheduling strategy, what's going on here. I want to review activities with high total float, very high total float. If I go back, so that's how we calculated the float. So what if I have total float for that activity 200 days in a project, which will take 300 days to complete? I have for one activity 200 days total float. It means the activity is scheduled to be completed very early, but I have up to 200 days more to complete it anytime I want. And there is something here we need to stop and think about, is it really realistic? What might be the reason for that? Because logically, don't think about Primavera right now. We talk logically right now. If this is the case, if the activity is not important enough to finish it right now and have it scheduled to be completed 200 days before the project completion without anything after that. So for example, this activity, if I have 200 days float, it means my start, for example, it will be 15 days, but based on my constraint, backward calculation, I'm going to have 215 late finish. Okay, so that's how you can understand total float. So I had the difference between late finish and the early finish is 200 days. As a result, the same calculation of the late dates will pass through the rest of the network, of course, unless it is critical. So if I have an activity here, for example, in this area, link it to that activity alone, it's going to pass also the total float, the high total float to it, because this activity is not critical anymore. Predecessor as well, because it is the only predecessor. So both activities can be completed anytime during the next 200 days. And typically what you would think about, there are two reasons or two aspects we want to talk about. The first aspect is if you have, or if you can, you need to schedule this activity a little bit later on, because it seems that it can be completed at later stage, maybe the last 3 months, right? It makes sense. Why would I need to start it or finish it 200 days before the project completion and we don't have any more successor activities? So that's something you want to think about. The second one is something might be a little bit tricky. When you do your forward calculations, like for example, I'm gonna finish my ceiling, then I'm gonna finish my tiles, then I will be ready to install the doors, for example. That's the natural logic. And before you know it, you will see the total float of doors are gonna be 200 days. So you have the doors installed now, but you have a slack, you have buffer, you can be delayed up to 200 days before the project is completed without delaying the project. But when you think about it, it is not true actually, because I linked the doors to a logical predecessor only, which is tiles. But practically on site, doors are something you do not want to damage, okay? So doors are a bit sensitive. You do not want to damage them. Although the area is ready to receive doors installation after tiles installation, maybe it is not a good idea to do that right now. Maybe you want to link the doors to the completion of the corridor hard work. Like outside the apartment, you will have some plaster, you will have some MEP work, you will have some work going on. This work can damage the doors if they are installed. So there is no logical relationship between the plaster of corridor and the doors of the apartment, for example, but it's a good idea to link them together for practical reasons to avoid damage, or the MEP for the ceiling in the corridor. So you don't have to wait until the area outside the apartment is completed 100%, but at least the hardcore work, the work that will require high motion and the movement of labors with equipment like staircases, like storing materials, using equipment like driller or something, right? You want to avoid that. So for the hardcore materials, you want to wait first, which means you're going to wait for some hardcore activities outside the apartment to be completed before you start the doors installation. And this will push the doors installation at later stage. So don't look only at the natural logic of activities like block and plaster only, or doors and tiles only. You have to look more broadly to think about something like that, like the practical aspects, because there is a practical aspect, and also you have to schedule the activities by naturalization as well. So how you can schedule the paint work after the plaster is completed. So the paint work is due right now by naturalization, okay? Normal sequence of work. The other aspect is practicality, which is not logical. It is not by naturalization. It's not natural. So as a part of that checklist, review high total float. You can also right-click, filter, total float is greater than maybe something really high, like 40 days, for example, and see what's going on. And group and sort, hide if empty, expand all. I have light fittings. I have them 60 days. It can be acceptable to you, but you can also find a way to talk about it, like you do not want to see light fittings by naturalization. Maybe you accept the fact that floor tiles are completed. The area is ready to receive light fittings, but you choose not to. There are ways to do that. For example, the light fittings can be installed by naturalization or by the delivery of light fittings. I explained the concept about free float of engineering and how it's linked and how we can keep free float and etc. But in some cases, like light fittings, it makes sense to have it driven by the procurement on purpose. So if we do our calculation for the procurement of light fittings backwards and see like we need to submit material submittal after the concrete of second floor, for example. No, I'm not gonna use this approach anymore. I'm gonna wait until the concrete all is completed, so that by doing the engineering cycle and the procurement, it will drive the start of light fittings. So you will see the light fittings driven by the procurement, not by floor tiles, not by naturalization. In some cases, it makes sense. And in this case, I'm going to push the light fittings even more to the right, which, and instead of having 60 days right now to complete, I'm going to be only allowed for 30 days because total float is generated based on finish date. So if I do the changes right now, I'm going to have the light fittings completed 25th of November, 1 month after. So if I complete the light fittings 1 month after, it means I have 1 month less of total float, 1 month less of buffer. It's all related right now. So I'm going to review the high float. This is also something maybe I want to look at 76 days. But what if I think like 60 days are enough? You're going to have maybe this activity, maybe 40 days, not 15 days. For the equipment, I'm going to take 30 days, not 20. You can increase the duration a little bit. And when you increase the duration, you can imagine right now the forward calculations of the forecasted early start and early finish dates and how it will affect all successors. Okay. And now I had to complete the roofing overall on 18th of October instead of August, which I had previously. So right now it will be completed on 18th of October. So I have only 40 days buffer. But if I complete the same set of activities in August, I have, of course, more buffer, so more total float. Don't confuse free float with total float. Free float for this activity is 0 because there is no buffer after with the successor. So I have combo system and MAP equipment. The combo system is driving the MAP equipment. The free float is the amount of duration or the time any activity can wait without affecting the start date of its successor. In this case, MAP equipment, I have 0 free float. The activity here is gonna start 1 day after the finish of combo system immediately. So that's a free float. And this is the total float. You're gonna review the free float for engineering activities the way I explained at the very beginning of the lecture, the free float and how they are scheduled in a way not to affect the construction activities. The last segment here we have is about critical path. So first, you wanna review the critical path, make sure it is practical. I'm gonna filter only the longest path. And I do not like this layout to review it, but I would like to see the flow of critical path. So I will delete in a grouping, delete from my keyboard, sort by start, and I can see right now the sequence right from the excavation, compaction, all foundation and draft, right? All way, yes, it's concrete, it makes sense. Then it has become block work, then the finishing activities. So it's okay, it's not wrong or anything, it's practical. And when you think about practical, you think about important activities, like for pipeline project, you wanna see excavation at some stage. The whole excavation for the project doesn't have to be critical, but at some point it's gonna be excavation, installing pipes, for example. But if you see the critical path is one delivery for equipment that will be delivered at the end of the project, something is wrong. That's not practical. The practical is how vital and important your activities are progressing over time. Last checkpoint. The number of critical activities are 5 to 15% of total activities. Because right now you understand the game right now. We are playing here, right? You know how total float is generated. You understand the network behavior. So you know right now that how I can reduce total float, how I can increase total float by playing with duration and dates. So you have the ability to control the number of critical activities, the number of activities that have 0 total float. You have the ability to do so, but it is not good practice to have a lot of critical activities. So it has to be maybe 15%, 20% is fine, but don't have half of the project critical, okay? Because the definition of critical activities is when there is a 1-day delay in any activity, it will cause corresponding delay to the overall completion of the project. What is the total float again? It's the buffer. It's the amount of time any activity can be delayed for without impacting the project completion. If I go back here, so that's total float. Okay. So what if I have here 4, the duration here 4 instead of 3? You know, right now, if you are a bit familiar, the total float will be reduced. So it's going to be 2 days. So 12 plus 4 is 16, minus 1 is 15. So 17 minus 15 is 2, right? So that's the total float. So the total float here, like the more you consume the total float, it will become less and less and less until it becomes 0 or even negative. And when it's negative, it will affect the project completion. So here is something will happen. If it's a 4, so 12 plus 4 is 16, minus 1 is 15. Okay, fine. So it's going to be 2 here. Okay, fine, no problem. What if it's a 5? And it doesn't have to be 5, by the way. There are different ways on how to control the float. For example, I'm going to have like 5 here, for example. So if it's a 5, it's going to be finished on day 12. This will become 13. So it's, you know, it's really, it depends on the float is based on the dates, right? So there are many ways on how you can see different dates. Okay, so if I want 15 to become 16, I can increase the duration here of that activity. So it will be completed on day 16. Or I can start this activity 1 day later. So it's going to start at 13, 13 plus 4, 17 minus 1, it will become 16 the way I want. So we understand right now what's going on. Okay, so there are many ways to do that. And what will happen is something like that. So if I make this 6, for example, to control the finish date, 12 plus 6 is 18, minus 1 is 17. So total float is 0. What if it's 7? 12 plus 7 is 19, minus 1 is 18. So right now, this activity is forecasted to be completed on day 18, while the late date should be day 17 based on my constraint here from the end backward. It's going to be negative 1. What else is going to happen? You see this activity, it should start on day 18 based on the finish date of its driver 17. But this is not the driver anymore. We have a new winner right now. So this activity is forecasted to be completed on day 18. And this activity has 2 predecessors. And in our forward calculations to see the forecasted dates, we look at the predecessors and take the greatest because it's going to be the driver. So in this case, it's not going to be 18, it's going to be 19. That's a new winner here. 19 plus 10 is 29, minus 1 is 28. Revise the float, it's going to be negative 1 as well. So this is a total float. The duration or the time you can wait or you can be delayed for without impacting the project completion. Originally, if you remember, I have 3 days. So the finish date of that activity can be delayed up to a specific date to have 0 total float. We kept consuming it, right, over time, and we saw the consequences. Okay, so this was, I think, 20 before, okay, because we did some changes here, but we kept consuming the total float. So total float is the amount of duration or time the activity can wait without impacting the project completion, and it kept being consumed until it actually drove the project completion. So now I will forecast to complete the project on day 28, not 27 anymore, because total float of one activity is consumed. So what happens in your schedule is total float is actually healthy for the project. So if you have 50% of the schedule activities to be critical, that's not good position, right? Because if there is only 1 day delay in any activity on this list, you're going to have corresponding delay to the whole project. So total float is healthy. There is one trick made by the clients. This trick is they will approach you, they will tell you that I'm a client, I have requirements in my schedule. And in my requirements, the total float should not exceed positive 14 days. That's my requirements. And many people will just follow that because, yeah, it's a client's requirements we have to do. But there is a trick behind that. There is, it is not done in good faith because they want to take advantage that the contractor's team is not really knowledgeable and they play this game. So I would always say that schedule your project, okay? And total float is a natural cause. It is not something you force. Some activities are more critical than not. Some activities have 2 days only of total float, while other activities have 30 days. It's natural like that. So when you force and add more relationships to have 14 days only, guess what will happen? The whole schedule is suffocated. The whole schedule, not only bunch or few activities, it's the whole schedule will have the limitation of total float of positive 14 days. At the beginning of the project, typically there is no effort required by the client. Okay, it is always by the contractor. Contractor is gonna take care of the substructure, excavation, right? So it's always like contractors own the activities. The first, like substructure, the more you progress with the project, you're going to have more responsibilities from the engineer and the client. Selection of material submittal. The employer or the engineer should review the material approval, and it might take long to approve it. So there are more responsibilities right now as you progress in the project. What about the nominations? What about the approval of specific activity, right? What about the shop drawings? For example, the block shop drawings cannot be started because you have to wait for the design from the engineer. There are more and more responsibilities. But at the substructure stage, we don't really see a lot of changes. So it's always most of the time, contractors owned. So they want to have the total float only 14 days. So you have got 14 days only opportunity to start not few activities, but all scheduled activities at any point of time, and it cannot be delayed by more than 14 days. It's like 14 days is like 2 weeks. And in my opinion, 1 week passes in construction is like 1 day. You would not feel 1 week in construction. It's like 1 day. It passes so quickly. So 2 weeks are very, very short window. Bottom line is, do not listen to this tricky messages. 14 days should not be forced, because the lower total float you have, the more suffocated the schedule will be, the less opportunities you have to recover delays that you had from any reason. And if you have more negative float, if you have more delays in the project, you really affect your ability to claim for extension of time. Some of you signed up for my delay analysis course, and it's something you can resonate with right now. So it can affect your ability to claim for extension of time. So I finished that checklist.